40, 30, 20, retard.
Airports are vital hubs in the global transportation of people and goods. Countless workers keep the operation running smoothly day and night. Summer and winter, and in almost any weather. What millions of customers take for granted demands a perfect organization behind the scenes. The people who work in aviation have to be trained to the highest standards, be reliable and disciplined. The smallest incident, the slightest complacency, can have unfortunate consequences, or much worse, cause an accident. Beat Haldiman, head of ground operations, has this to say. Some $4 billion worth of damage is caused handling aircraft every year, so work carefully and protect yourself. Safety comes before punctuality. Safety is always our number one. You're our number one too when it comes to safety. When working on the ramp, always remember how complex and challenging your working environment is. So always remain vigilant to keep your workplace safe and accident-free. To ensure the level of concentration that your job requires, always start your shift well rested. Make sure you get enough sleep. Alcohol and drugs are strictly prohibited during and before your work. Medication can affect your perception too, and can compromise your driving or your ability to operate the equipment correctly. Only perform tasks that you have been trained to do. If you have not been trained or not sure of the task at hand, tell your superior for your own safety. The ramp is a place where aircraft are fueled and dangerous goods are handled. So smoking is strictly prohibited. Only smoke in the designated areas. And don't use mobile phones for private use. Your work needs your full attention. Never take risks. Always use a safe area or stop your vehicle in a safe place before you use your radio, scanner or tablet. Eliminate all distractions. Whenever you're on the ramp, all your clothes and equipment must meet the latest safety regulations. You'll often be working in bad weather, noise, or in the dark, so always wear the correct high-visibility clothing and personal protective equipment to minimize the risk of accident. Your clothing doesn't just keep you safe, but also reflects your company. Lifting heavy items can endanger your health. Know your physical capabilities and always follow all health and safety regulations and recommendations. Always keep an eye on your posture when unloading or loading baggage. Avoid sudden jerky movements and take special care of your back and joints. And if something's too heavy, get someone to help. Your main job as a ramp worker will be dealing with cargo, baggage and mail, as well as operating various handling equipment. Always be vigilant of your surroundings. It's safety that's involved here. Your safety and that of your colleagues too. Always check your equipment before use to ensure correct serviceability. If you find any issue, tag it out of service and notify your superior. Only ever work with equipment that's working properly. This is the only way to guarantee safety. When driving on the ramp, lights must be on and all traffic rules must be followed. Always close the vehicle's doors and use the seatbelt wherever applicable. There are maximum speed limits on the apron roads and taxiways, and you may only drive at walking pace whenever you're near an aircraft. On the apron, aircraft always have priority. So watch out for the red flashing beacon lights on an aircraft, which indicate that the aircraft is about to move or already moving. Before an aircraft taxis onto its stand, the stand area has to be checked for FOD, foreign object debris. Any FOD found, screws, bits of plastic from bags, cups, cans, bits of wood, plastic film and so on, must be removed. If such items struck the landing gear or were to be ingested by an engine, the damage caused could result in very expensive repairs. So all FOD must be disposed of in the bins provided. Next, the wheel chocks, cones, vehicles and equipment will need to be readily available prior to the aircraft arrival. This will ensure that the equipment is positioned promptly and the unloading process performed efficiently. When doing this, keep the taxi-in area totally free so the aircraft can taxi in unobstructed. Bear in mind that the pilots in the flight deck have only a restricted view of the stand area. It's very hard, for instance, for them to assess how much lateral space they have. Any equipment on the stand may also be hard to see, especially at night, in bright lights or in poor weather. Wait for the aircraft with a safe distance away from the taxi centerline, and pay attention to all the apron markings. Always remember that you are in public view from the terminal and from the passengers on board the plane. So always act professionally and be safety conscious in everything you do. Never get too close to a moving aircraft in the course of your work. The area forward of any running engine is very dangerous due to the suction created. Getting too close to it increases considerably the risk of being ingested, which could result in severe injury or death. There is also a blast area behind a running engine, where hot air is emitted at high speed. Also, pilots will always use more thrust when they taxi away, so there's a real danger, especially when an aircraft is turning, of equipment being knocked over and people being injured. Never underestimate this risk. How far back this blast zone extends will depend on the engine, the aircraft type, and its weight. As a rule, though, you should always allow about 2 aircraft lengths. As soon as the aircraft has come to a halt, secure the nose landing gear with chocks. Do this before you connect the ground power. If you're using a GPU cable with a hook, Don't just hang this anywhere on the fuselage. You must hang it on the device provided. Once the red flashing light is off and the engines have shut down, you can go to the rear to chock the main landing gear too. The supervisor will check the area around the aircraft door and then give the all clear sign for the air bridge to be attached. The loading supervisor is also responsible for the arrival damage check. The fuselage, cabin doors, cargo doors, wing edges and engines must be checked for any scratches, dents or other signs of damage. Any damage found must be reported immediately to the flight deck. Cones are also placed around the aircraft to protect aircraft extremities from collisions with maneuvering ramp vehicles. The cones are vitally important to guide the drivers of these vehicles, who often can't see the wings and engines from their driving position. But only correctly placed cones can help prevent collisions, so never move a cone. Only after the cones have been placed can air bridges, catering trucks, service vehicles, pallet loaders and belt loaders be positioned around the aircraft. With the belt loader, extend the rail to about a hand's width from the fuselage to protect people from falling. Before you approach any aircraft in a vehicle, always do a precautionary brake test to a total stop. But be sure not to cause any injury or damage when you do so. Look carefully around you before you continue, and when you arrive at the aircraft, check the door area for any signs of damage. If you see any, call your supervisor immediately and report it to the flight deck too. Positioning air bridges, service vehicles and loading equipment around the aircraft calls for the highest concentration. Every piece of equipment must be precisely placed according to the aircraft type and must be used exactly as per procedures and with the utmost care. The aircraft unloading and loading processes require various maneuvers which could also cause damage, especially if the equipment involved is incorrectly positioned. Misjudging distances, distractions and stress are the most common causes of damage. Damage repairs can take several days and cost vast amounts of money. Just think of the consequences of a single cancelled flight, or worse. So regardless of the circumstances, always report immediately any damage that you see or suspect. Only a qualified aircraft engineer can decide on the next action to take. Special care is needed with aircrafts that have been partly manufactured with composite materials, like the new Bombardier C series. Here you must strictly observe the no contact rule and keep a distance of at least 5 centimeters between the equipment and the aircraft. More and more aircraft parts, wings, engine cowlings and fuselage elements are being made of these composite materials. These materials give on impact, but then spring back to their original shape. As a result, they may not look damaged from the outside, but they may have suffered serious internal damage, as this composite cowling from the test lab shows. Whenever there is contact between an aircraft and a vehicle or a piece of ramp equipment, the aircraft cannot depart until a technical specialist has X-rayed the area affected to check for possible damage. So always report any contact immediately, even if you can't see any damage. If you have to leave a vehicle near an aircraft, always remember that the fueling vehicle may have to move away quickly. So never block a fueling truck's exit with vehicles, equipment, or materials. The ends of the wings are an area with a higher risk of explosion because of the location of the fuel tank vents, where fuel vapor can escape. Basically, variable height vehicles may never be driven under an aircraft's wing. When positioning the air bridge, always allow enough gap under the cabin door. The aircraft will rise during the unloading process and then sink again during the loading process. The service and passenger doors have different ways of opening depending on the aircraft type. Only ever open a door that you have been trained to open. Here's an example of opening a service door from the outside. With Airbus and Bombardier C-Series aircraft, make sure that the red pressure warning light in the window is off before you open the door. Always open the door fully and make sure you hear it click into place. Here's how to open a service door from the inside. Before you do so, always check that the emergency slide is no longer armed and that the area outside is clear of any obstruction. After swinging the door open, make sure you hear it click into place. Here's another example, opening a Boeing 777 door. When you open a door from the inside, always check first that the emergency slide isn't armed and the area outside is clear of any obstruction. Here too, make sure that the door clicks into place. The passenger and service doors are equipped with emergency slides. If they are wrongly opened, these slides can explosively deploy and cause a major accident. If the emergency slides have to be deployed for a passenger evacuation, this will need adequate space. So never place any vehicles or equipment that are not in use by or near a closed aircraft door. In an emergency, the aircraft must be left as quickly as possible. The order to evacuate may, but need not necessarily, be issued by the crew. If you detect smoke, fire, or anything else affecting safety while you're on board, raise the alarm and leave the aircraft as quickly and calmly as possible. Notify the fire services and warn the gate staff and any ramp personnel working around the aircraft. Some airports allow an aircraft to be fueled while passengers are deplaning or boarding under certain conditions. In such cases, to ensure that the aircraft can be quickly evacuated if necessary, the ground supervisor will work with the flight deck crew to ensure that one of the pilots informs the cabin crew when the fueling starts and ends. The cabin crew are at their door positions. The fueling supervisor on the apron keeps an eye on the fueling and stays in touch with the flight deck to give the alarm if necessary by headset or hand signal. The area below the left rear door is kept free for the emergency slide. At some airports, they will also ensure that the fire services are duly informed. In such cases, the boarding will also be performed in such a way that the aircraft can be quickly evacuated in the opposite direction. Be extra careful when driving in the loading and unloading areas. Only walking pace is permitted, and loading vehicles have priority. With all the vehicle and equipment movements going on, you need total concentration. In tight spaces, and when your vision is restricted, or if it's required by the regulations, get someone to guide you in. High loaders and other catering vehicles must be secured with supports, parking brakes, or chocks. Some types of aircraft are subject to ground stability limitations. This means that when they're being unloaded or loaded, they can become critically unstable, where the nose rises up and tail tipping occurs. These aircraft must generally have their rear cargo holds emptied first, and loading must usually start at the front. The same is true of the passengers. If those seated at the front have already deplaned, but those at the back are still on board, tail tipping may occur. So you must follow the specified procedures precisely. All loading must be performed in accordance with the loading instructions. And in view of the possible shifts in the center of gravity, any changes must always be first discussed with load control. Always stay alert when unloading and loading the aircraft. The blowout panels in the cargo hold can come out of their mountings fairly easily, so you need to be especially careful. If you see that one of the panels is loose, or if one falls out during your cargo handling, tell an aircraft engineer or the flight deck immediately. In this circumstance, the fire extinguishing system can no longer be effective as required. Once the unloading is completed, check if any damage has been revealed in the loading bay. Also check that nothing has been left in the loading bay, ballast included, except for loads that have been notified for further transportation. Check before loading begins that the loading bay is totally empty or only contains loads scheduled for onward transportation. During loading, check every ULD number against the load plan to ensure that all baggage and every pallet and container are loaded in the correct position. It's the loading supervisor's responsibility to ensure that the aircraft is correctly loaded. The load supervisor will have all the details on how the payload is to be distributed and how any special items are to be loaded and secured. He must confirm by signing the loading instructions that everything has been loaded in accordance with the instructions, and only once loading is completed, of course. During the loading process, make sure that all the containers and pallets are secured as required. Pay particular attention that the ULD fasteners are set and engaged, especially in no-fit positions. All the nets must be fitted and tightened, even if a loading bay is empty. Under no circumstances may the payload move around during flight. This could affect the aircraft's balance and even cause it to crash. So always be careful and attentive throughout the loading process, even when time is tight. Safety first. Never load a damaged container or an incorrectly stacked pallet. A damaged container could get stuck, and a badly stacked pallet could shed its load and cause damage to the walls, ceiling, and door seals. Barrels must always be stood up and secured against tipping over. Dangerous goods can also be carried on passenger aircraft. They may include corrosive or flammable materials, explosives, poisons, or slightly radioactive materials. There are strict regulations for transporting dangerous goods, along with special training to ensure correct handling. And their packaging, labeling, and loading positions are also precisely regulated. All dangerous goods items must be placed on the loading bay floor and correctly lashed down. Be careful not to damage the packaging when securing it. You must also place the dangerous goods items in such a way that the labels face the cargo door and are easily visible. You must be familiar with the various types of dangerous goods and know how to react if the packaging gets damaged or in an emergency situation. Any complacency or wrong action can have devastating consequences. Never touch damaged dangerous goods. Toxic fumes may not be visible, but they can quickly and seriously impact your health. So put your own safety first and the safety of your colleagues. Clear the area and immediately tell your colleagues around the aircraft and the crew on board. Immediately call the fire services and inform your superiors. Specialist personnel will need to be called in to check for possible contamination of the load or the loading bay before the aircraft can depart. Animals are carried as cabin baggage or as cargo in the hold. Don't open any containers with animals, don't tease the animals, and don't touch them either. Protect them as much as possible from noise, stress, bad weather, heat, or cold. Some parts of an aircraft's hold can also be cooled or heated, depending on needs and the time of year. If it's extremely hot and a long-haul flight is involved, animals should not be loaded in the hold, or until the latest possible time before departure, if at all. An overheated loading bay can take hours to cool down, and too much heat for such a long period can be fatal for the animal. Always make sure that there is enough space around the cargo doors to open and close easily. Also, all safety nets must be fitted and tightened, even if there is no cargo on board. Whenever you close a door, always check to ensure that it is fully and properly closed. This applies to the cargo doors and all the protective flaps too. Make sure that the doors and flaps that you have used are all properly closed before departure. It is your responsibility. Once the loading has been completed, you must check the loading areas for any possible FOD. FOD can cause damage when the aircraft is pushed back too. Don't disconnect the ground power until you are instructed to do so by the flight deck. If the ground power is removed too soon, all the flight deck instrumentations will shut down and will have to be reset, and that is bound to mean a delay to the flight. Also, always make sure that the air bridge is never retracted while the ground power or air conditioning hose are still connected. Doing so would severely damage the connection socket on the aircraft and could result with the flight being cancelled. Only once the last ramp vehicle has been driven away can the cones be collected and removed. The loading supervisor will then give the order for the chocks to be removed. The aircraft is now ready to depart. As a further safety precaution, the person overseeing the pushback and who will be in contact with the pilots by headset will make a final walk-around to check that all the aircraft's doors and flaps are properly closed and that the pushback area is free from all handling equipment. He also checks that there is no visible damage to the fuselage, the wing edges, or the engines. And if any damage is found, it must be immediately reported to the pilots. If you too notice any irregularity of any kind, you must communicate this immediately to flight deck. Thank you that I can rely on you 100%. Whenever you're driving a vehicle, always adjust your speed to the current weather conditions. Heavy rain, fog and snow will reduce visibility. And water, ice and de-icing fluid will substantially increase the distance you take to stop. In stormy conditions, some handling activities and any aircraft fueling may have to be restricted or suspended entirely. In strong wind conditions, chocks must be placed behind and in front of every landing gear set. In storm wind conditions, the cargo doors and passenger doors must be closed. And in some cases, service vehicles and air stairs, air bridges and containers will have to be moved away from the aircraft and secured in their new position. If there's a risk of lightning during a storm, you must never be connected to the flight deck via the headset, and all flight deck communications must be by radio or by hand signals. Fueling is also prohibited in such conditions. Everyone who works on the ramp must act carefully and responsibly in everything they undertake. So adapt your working pace and rhythm to the weather and the visibility you're working in, and always make safety your #1 priority. Safety comes in various forms: keeping focused and alert, looking after our work tools and equipment, wearing the right clothing, observing all the regulations, and, last but by no means least, thinking in terms of the team. Each and every one of you makes a huge contribution to keeping our handling accident-free. Here's Beat Haldiman. Always report anything you see that you think might be a risk. Safety is always our #1, and you are our #1 too. We're counting on you. Our sincerest thanks for your contribution towards working safely around our aircraft.